Thanks, Mark. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our April task force meeting. This is going to be a little different from some of our last meetings in that we are going to be working today. So most of our time will be in breakout sessions looking at some of the recommendations for this year's task force report. The agenda is pretty brief. You should have seen it. We'll have some housekeeping items here, public comments, some updates from the Public Service Commission, and then we're going to move into our group discussion on our annual report, which Kristen will be leading for us. After that, we'll be talking a little bit about next steps and then wrapping up for today. With that, I can turn it over to Mark for both housekeeping items and for public comment.
Thanks, Chris. All right, great to see everyone. Thanks for attending. Welcome to the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access. Today is Wednesday, April 17th, 2024. I would just like to remind everyone that this is a public meeting and that it is being recorded. A meeting agenda is available on the Public Service Commission events calendar and also on the task force webpage. Also, in an effort to maintain audio quality, please mute yourself when not speaking. Also ask that members of the public be mindful of their audio and remain muted throughout the duration of the meeting other than the public comment period. I will go ahead and do a roll call for those that are members of the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access. Bob Abrams. Vico Baker. Kwame Barnes. Marta Bechtel.
Yeah.
Thank you. Brittany Beyer.
Here.
Sal Carranza.
Here.
Lori Collins. Oh, she let me know she wouldn't be in attendance. Doug Cox also let me know he would not be in attendance. Angie Dickinson.
Here.
Emily Dittmar.
Here.
Russ Falkenberg.
Here, Mark.
Thanks, Russ. Celeste let me know she wouldn't be in attendance. Chris Hershong. Justin Hebner.
Here.
Thank you. Gail Hike.
Here.
Barbara Koldos.
Here.
State Senator Mark Leiner staff. Jose Martinez. State Representative Mersauer staff. State Representative Radcliffe or staff. State Senator Paffer staff. Rachel Shemlin.
I'm here, Mark.
Thank you, Rachel. Steve Schneider. Michelle Schuler, let me know she wouldn't be in attendance. Brett Schuttner. Chet Streeb.
Here.
Thank you, Chet. And Chad Young.
Here.
Thanks, Chad. I do not believe I missed anyone, but if I did, could you please let me know now? All right, I'll keep an eye on the attendance list. Now is the time where we will allow for public comment. This is the sole opportunity for members of the public to make a comment during this meeting. Members of the public may soon unmute and make a public comment should they desire. I do ask that the public comment remain brief and also pertain to the subject of broadband access. You may also utilize the chat function in Zoom to let us know you would like to make a public comment. I will ask for public comment now.
Yes.
Yes, hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm wondering, after watching the meeting last week on YouTube, I'm wondering if there's been any conversation about having ISPs share the new fiber that's being installed.
That's a good question. We have had presenters share their plans, and I believe our Wisconsin Broadband Planning Map has a list of where you could see where a lot of the broadband fiber plans are. We do have some ISPs on, and Rory is also on. Would you like to elaborate a little more?
Yeah, I can hop on a little bit. Michael, thanks for the question and thanks for listening in and watching our recording. I think certainly trying to get ahead of it and understand where ISPs are planning to build is a really key part of making sure we're allocating our funding and supporting construction where there's still needs help. That's something we're working really hard on through kind of the implementation of the BEAD program. And so certainly it's something we're taking a look at, and we already do collect a lot of data from our ISPs on kind of their planned builds and where they're headed next. So I think the answer is generally yes, it's something we work on a lot. But we can always do better.
I'm not sure that I was clear enough with my question. My question is really about, in order to receive this BEAD money, are there any requirements in place that the fiber the new fiber that gets installed is required to be shared by multiple ISPs? In other words, when they broke up AT&T, that allowed TDS and other people to offer services over copper, like phone and DSL and so forth. And my question relates to, is there going to be competition introduced into the system by requiring that the ISPs share this fiber between the various providers in order to give consumers more choices of broadband providers?
Got it. Different type of sharing, yeah. I think the way the BEAD program is written, it was written by Congress at the federal level. They didn't build that type of kind of shared open access requirement into the way that the program is administered. So we're at the state level, we're kind of subject to those federal requirements. And so we're not in a position where we can require that. I think most of the time it's a real benefit and we encourage it if ISPs are willing, but the way the BEAD program is written in federal law, it's not required.
Well, what made me think of that is the gentleman from Boulder Junction was talking about their fiber that they put in. But when he was asked about whether his customer base was increasing or decreasing, he said he didn't know because they didn't have access to that data. And that struck me as unusual that a community would put in community-wide broadband, but yet have no idea of who their residents, what level they were subscribing to, when they were signing up, when they were disconnecting, any of that information. It just struck me as odd that he said they spent almost a year doing contracts, that somehow that didn't get into the contract, that they would actually be able to understand what their residents were doing.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's an interesting issue, and thanks for bringing it up, Michael. I think task force members are listening, so maybe they'll get some thoughts and ideas from what you're saying, and maybe that feeds into some recommendations. But we appreciate you coming and bringing your comments. I think it's certainly an issue that we need to think more about. So thanks for taking the time.
Well, I just happen to be in an area where there is no competition, like most of the residents of Wisconsin.
Yeah. No, we hear you clear, Michael. Thanks for joining us. And maybe task force members are listening. If they have ideas, we can fold those in as we talk today.
Well, I'll keep asking it.
Good.
Good, we appreciate it. Something
I'll keep
again,
asking it till you get sick of me.
Yeah, we're always improving, always looking for the input, so really appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Second call for any public comment. And last call for any public comment. All right, hearing none. As a note, written public comment is also accepted on an ongoing basis. We have directions on how to do so on our task force webpage, along with other information like meeting agendas, recordings, and updates. I'll hand it over to Chris now to go get us through the rest of the agenda. Chris?
Thank you, Mark. So we're moving on to item number 3 on our agenda, which is updates from the Public Service Commission. And this will be given to us by Alyssa.
Maybe I'll start, Alyssa. Okay, so first big update, certainly working behind the scenes here to wrap up some final details. But last week we got approval from the federal government on part 1 of our BEAD implementation process. That's the state challenge process, what we call volume 1. Really exciting step for us. I think a lot of work and a lot of effort by ISPs, partners, all kind of on the back end of things to get everything set up and lined up for this. But our goal now, I'll post some links in the chat, but our goal is to open this challenge process within the next couple days by announcing and posting kind of instructions and data. And then from there, folks can come and participate in kind of a 30-day period to make sure we have the best map possible for where we allocate our BEAD funds. So that's a really big milestone. I think hundreds and maybe thousands of hours of staff and time working on that. And I think it feeds in from a lot of the recommendations we've had from the task force over time on getting better, more accurate data about where and how we need to allocate broadband funding. So that's a really big highlight for us so far in the broadband office. And maybe I'll pass it to Alyssa for part 2 of our updates.
Thank you. I can't tell you how delighted many of us in the office and across the state are to have volume 1 approval. It's a really exciting piece, but I wanted to just mention 3 other things quickly to the task force. If you haven't heard, our digital equity plan, Wisconsin's digital equity plan, was accepted and approved by NTIA. And then at the end of the month, we had the digital equity capacity grants released by NTIA. And you might have seen the state of Wisconsin is allocated $13.2 million to implement our digital equity plan. And somebody might be going, well, that's lower than expected. One of the things that is somewhat unique that happened is the money is being distributed in 3 tranches. So there's $1.4 billion available, and this first tranche is the first $800 million, and then there'll be a $300 million and a $300 million, and the rest is some admin and territories. And so we will continue to get 2 additional tranches after this initial tranche, but you can expect the state will be applying for now the digital equity capacity funds in our allocation, and then rolling out some targeted programs to implement the digital equity plan as approved. So that's really exciting. Also, in the last couple of weeks, on April 2nd, the commission opened what we call Capital Project Fund Digital Connectivity and Navigators Grant Program. And this is $33 million. So a larger sum than digital equity. And it's to basically do 3 things, and they have to be kind of paired up together. One thing is to deploy devices to low-income, underserved, and underconnected households. The other thing is to do apartment Wi-Fi or MDU Wi-Fi. So it doesn't have to be an apartment. It could be a condo, a duplex, a manufactured home park, etc. But basically 1 parcel, multiple units. And then whether you're doing Wi-Fi or you're doing devices, for that to be paired with a digital navigator. And just if folks remember from some of their first reports and previous recommendations, the task force has been pretty persistent in recommending digital navigators as a strategy that the state used to close the digital divide. So this is really a great opportunity for the commission and for the task force to sort of make some of that come to fruition with this next grant program. And then finally, and this is not a PSC update, but I thought people would be interested to know that broadband labels for those nutrition labels, or people sometimes call them nutrition labels, they were launched last week for providers that have 100,000 customers or more across the nation. So not everybody yet, but many of our bigger providers in the state have them up now, publicly available. And those were a task force recommendation in our first report to launch those broadband labels. So it's really exciting that the FCC took that on and that those are now coming into the marketplace for consumers to have a little bit better information. And I think I am done with my updates. I'm done with the other half of the PSC updates. So thanks, everybody.
You know, Alyssa, I don't get my bill for my broadband anymore from one of the large carriers because I do it electronically. I kind of want to get the bill now so I can see that. I might have to go out and sign up for paper invoices just so I can see that nutrition label. Very cool. Do we have any questions from the task force on any of the updates you heard before we move on? Okay, item number 4, we're moving into the group discussion, so be ready to think. This is going to be led by Kristen. We're going to have some breakout sessions specifically looking at our annual report recommendations. Kristen?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so today it's exciting that we've come this far in the year again. and we're ready to discuss our recommendations. So we gathered over the last couple of meetings all of the proposed recommendations based on earlier homework, based on our discussion, based on notes that we have. We've compiled those into a document, and you can access this one of two ways. When you go into your group, each group will have its own Google document where they can comment on each of the recommendation using the comment function. This is a bit of a change from how we've done things over the last few meetings. Typically, we're using Google Slides, but this really lends itself to documents better. If you don't have access to Google Documents, and quite a few people might not have access to that, I've emailed a paper Microsoft Word copy. It should be in your email box right now. And this is formatted identically to the Google document. So you should be able to follow along on your own computer screen and see what everybody is talking about. They're numbered identically, worded the same. And of course, the ratings are all of the same. So what we would like to do is go into 3 breakout groups. Mark will assign each of us to breakout groups. We have PSC staff who will facilitate the breakout groups. Each group has I just dropped it in the chat, has a Google document that will be theirs to comment on. We'll talk for 15 minutes about recommendations 1 through 10, then come back together and discuss those recommendations as a group. After we're done with that discussion, we'll go back into breakout groups and we'll discuss recommendations 11 through 25 in our second breakout session, then come back, discuss those, and discuss the total of the recommendations at that time. So with that, does anyone have any questions before we head out into breakout land?
Hey, Kristen, this is Chris. Just one note, the document you just emailed to us is links to the Google Docs site. They're not that.
If you could, there should be a second page on there. Is there a second page?
There is. We just need to scroll. Thank you for the
All right.
direction.
So no, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I intended to say that links are on the first page in case you have access later and want to see the comments and the actual recommendations. I start on the second page. So other questions? With that, Mark, I think we're ready to go into breakouts.
All right, put them. Josie will facilitate group 1 and Matt will do group 2, and there's only 2 groups. So here we go.
Mark, do you want to drop me in one of the groups and I'll just tag along and help out either Matt or Josie?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Chris, are you going into a breakout group or are you going to remain out with us?
Whatever you'd like. I'm waiting for it.
I have no preference.
I'm happy to be in a group. I didn't get moved to a room though.
All right, let me put them in a room. All right, you should be receiving that here now, Chris.
I got it. Thanks.
I'm going to go off camera and watch the comments in the groups. I'll still be listening.
Mark, it's Russ. I didn't appear to get moved into a group, or is this the group?
I'm sorry about that, Russ.
That's all right.
Yeah, let's see what, oh, weird. It said it unassigned you. Weird, interesting. I didn't, but here you go. You should get that invite now.
Yep.
Mark, does a member of the public get to play in a group?
No, the discussion is only for task force members.
Okay.
Appreciate your willingness to participate, though.
Well, I got a lot to say.
If you like, you could put public comment. You can send us an email and check that out on the website, or we can always have a separate conversation on the side outside the meetings too as well.
Hey, Mark.
2 minutes, Kristen.
No, this is Ellen Kupfer in Kenosha.
Oh, hi, Ellen.
I think you were at the PSC training at Parkside. Okay, I'm the lady that brought up the question about tribes because we have a casino going here. Can I get your contact? You want to just give me a number or something to reach you at so we can talk a little more, but you're on mute.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat for you.
Okay. If I can find chat, where's chat? Okay. Thank you. I'll get a hold of you and maybe we can find a time to talk and you can kind of brief me on what I need to know in terms of bringing issues up here in Kenosha as they look at expanding broadband.
Sounds good. I'll be happy to have that conversation with you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go silent again.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody should be coming back now. There we go.
Mark, it sounds like we did not finish.
Yeah, our group was chatty, which is a good problem.
No, that's a good thing, and it's a perfect opportunity to keep her going.
Should we add some time to the second
Yeah, I think so.
session? All right. Do you want to go through what we have now, or would you like to go right back in? What would your preference be?
Let's go over what we got.
All right. And Rory, why don't we have you go first then for group one?
I just volunteered myself.
You did.
Yeah, I think we kind of started at the top of the list and walked down, I think, on number one, talking about kind of streamlining and improving processes for reporting. I think the flavor was we like that recommendation, but maybe find ways to have the broadband office advertise or make available more technical assistance, because I think providers sometimes know we're here to help, but making it more available or accessible helps get through some of those hoops that we need to jump through sometimes to fulfill federal reporting requirements. That was maybe one tweak we had on number one. I think talking about tribal coordination, I think certainly emphasizing that and recognizing that it's a requirement for BEAD and we should get ahead of that. I think that one comment I had there was, we heard from folks there was, it can sometimes be hard to make sure that everybody understands the timelines and expectations and roles and things. So just kind of making sure between ISPs and tribal partners, everybody's on board and understands that. We also talked about utility locating a little bit, and I think the flavor was, yeah, these recommendations are good, but oh my gosh, what more can we do? Because the locates are going to balloon, and we kind of just got cut off on that discussion. So maybe Justin, I know you were saying something. I don't know if you have anything to add on top of that, but.
Well, I think, Bob had kind of framed it up and say, if we're going to make the request, how do we make the request in a way that actually gives the PSC some level of authority to truly, affect that in that situation? Because right now, we know it's not great now. You add that much volume, it's going to most likely be worse without some changes. But, the PSC just doesn't have a huge amount of authority. So, is it ultimately a plea to, change law to get more authority placed in that, so that the PSC with the broadband office can help navigate that if, you know, it does start to break down, and hold parties responsible, you know.
I think that was something we didn't get to. That was recommendation number 8 there. The establish a reporting system and monetary penalties to hold telecommunications providers and ISPs accountable for failure to complete locates within the required time period. Is that kind of attacking what you're thinking, Justin?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, you know, because I think that's the only way you're going to get there, you know, is, you know, you have to pay for locates, and in certain situations, people don't want to pay for that. So then they just avoid it, which causes problems. Or you've got other people that call in projects for 3 months, and that causes problems. And, you know, it feels like you need someone to referee it at some point, you know.
Referee is a good model to think about. Maybe while we're on locates, what did the other group think about locates? Did that hit the mark, or was there more additions?
We didn't talk specifically about locates. We didn't get to that question. We did talk about the tribal components. There are 2 priorities out there around that we talked about. More specifically around the enabling collaboration with tribal units, and recognizing that it's very different world where different rules apply, and the things that installers and providers are used to dealing with are going to be different there. But we didn't get a chance to talk specifically about that one, Rory. I can talk about our other ones if you'd like.
Maybe I'll throw my last thought. The last thing we talked about was kind of the state broadband funding and where that fits into the whole puzzle. I think task force members are on our group were interested in state funding, but maybe making sure state funding happens after BEAD, because everybody's up to their eyeballs in implementing BEAD. So, you know, complete the BEAD allocation process and then pull in state funding after the allocation process. Kind of don't open a state grant round this fall, because how could anyone possibly? And I, as staff, I wholly agree. So I'm not complaining with that kind of framing of the recommendation. I think, was it Emily or Rachel maybe brought up? I think it was Rachel. Sorry, Rachel. Line extensions, talking about kind of the cost of those installation costs to get from the fiber passing to the actual home has been a barrier. And I think that's been a recommendation in the past, maybe some state funding for line extensions. So maybe re-emphasizing that recommendation. That was all our group had.
Well, thank you, Rory. And Chris, are you speaking on behalf of group 2?
Well, I'm not. I'll open it up to
That
other
Josie?
if they want to speak. I'm happy to complete what I made a few notes. Did anybody else want to speak? Okay, I didn't expect anybody to jump up. So we spent a lot of time talking about the first item. A couple of things, obviously finding efficiencies with reporting and processes is always a good thing to do. It was pointed out that the application process for some of the broadband programs has grown extensively. I think it was from 3 to 52 pages over the last couple of years. But there was a positive, and that was that the reimbursement from the PSC has been much improved in the process as well. We also, as I mentioned, talked about tribal coordination. And one of the things we talked about at the very end was the fact that subsidies and really the programs that we've talked about considerably about 2 months ago, they're in the top 10, but it was way down at number 7. We're a little surprised that was as low as it was. But other than that, those are the comments we got to in the time we had.
All right, good comments, but we need more time. So in this next one, let us go back. Why don't we take a full 30 minutes, and we'll come back at 10 minutes after 2. I think that will give us more than enough time to do our group discussion and move on to our last item on the agenda. So does 30 minutes sound reasonable, or does that sound like too much time?
I think if we wrap up, we can shoot Mark a message and then.
Yep, that'll be fine. And even if you guys finish before, then you guys could have the option to leave the breakout room early.
Sounds good. All right. So we'll plan on 30 minutes and sending you to your breakout sessions as soon as Mark's ready.
All right, here we go. Great, glad to hear they're talking. It's good.
There we go. Yeah, I'm glad. Good discussions, good points. All right, I'm gonna turn my camera off again and watch the comments come across.
Sounds good.
Can you drop me into a room?
Is that you, Hannah?
Yeah, I got your message. No worries.
Okay. 1 minute, Kristen.
All right. I don't think they've made it all the way through.
No, considering there was more recommendations, but I'm sure that extra time helped. And I can't wait to hear all the good conversations they had.
For sure. Yeah. Group 2 looks like they made it through them all.
All right, here they come.
Welcome back. That was more time, but I'm going to guess it probably wasn't quite enough time.
It was just right for us.
Well, good, good, good. Is that
Time
true for
flies.
both groups?
It was a lot of recommendations, so.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to guess it was a speedy discussion at times.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Group
we didn't get through them all.
You didn't get through them all. All right. Well, let's start with group 2 and then go to group 1, and perhaps we can come back around to group 2 and live in front of the whole group. Maybe there's some information that you can, or feedback you can offer on the recommendations that you didn't get to, because I think we probably could have used another 5 or 10 minutes, but here we are. All right. So group 2.
All right, I'm gonna go down the line here, and then folks from group 2 feel free to jump in with any nuance. But we started with recommendation 8, establishing a reporting system and monetary penalties to hold telecommunication utilities and ISPs accountable for failure to complete locates. Rory kind of touched on that in our last break, but this seemed like a really great idea, but also some noted that reporting is burdensome and costly for ISPs. So keeping that in mind and maybe thinking a little bit more critically about that piece. Number 9, talking about workforce development boards and including all of these different groups in workforce planning efforts. The main piece that our group talked about was really trying to define what support looks like, what that might be as far as funding, as far as increasing outreach to the right stakeholders, the right groups, increasing education via DPI, or what kinds of resources and outreach is happening in high schools, for instance. And then also the challenge of doing this on a statewide scale across multiple agencies is something to consider in this recommendation. That kind of dovetailed with number 10. We kind of discussed those two together. And then we discussed number 11 and 12 together, talking a bit about, let's see, workforce development and job readiness and increasing adoption efforts using digital equity practitioners, trusted local partners. The one piece, I think Chris mentioned this, is that, if we're going to try and encourage the use of digital channels and digital skilling, the state should take a kind of broad approach to encouraging this across all of its channels. I think he made the example of if you're going to, you're going to apply for your license registration online, they're going to charge you an extra fee. That doesn't make too much sense for encouraging digital participation in that way. Let's see. Number 13 was also in the realm of digital equity, and we talked a bit about having a lot of people at the table to ensure that all the right funds and resources and outreach is there to really find the right tools as ACP winds down and find those resources for digital inclusion and digital equity services. And let's see, number 14, permitting coordination. I I think it was Chad who brought up that they see a lot of problems at the federal level, less at the state level. And we're kind of across the board surprised that this wasn't ranked a little bit higher as a recommendation. And let's see, number 16, looking at Lifeline, encouraging more ISPs to become eligible telecommunications carriers to increase marketing and outreach about the federal, state and federal Lifeline programs. I think the feeling in our group was that this is more of a stopgap remedy, but also important for addressing affordability, but there may be an opportunity to recommend that some actual state funds are needed to address these needs. And lastly, I think we only got to number 17. This one, we kind of just were surprised by the spread of the rankings of this one and how low it ranked, considering that this had been discussed on the task force since it was started, and really trying to drive home that both infrastructure and digital skills and adoption are needed. Yeah, anybody else have anything they want to add from group 2? I was just rolling down the line here.
I would just add that on the affordability piece, and it kind of bleeds into the other digital equity items. On the affordability of subscriptions side, other states are looking at some sort of a state funding mechanism that could be public-private partnership in order to have something that exists. You know, Lifeline is a fraction of what ACP was, and it was just so, it was used, it could have grown. So it just really calls to the fact that people are really needing support in order to be connected. But to solve this issue, there needs to be alignment that goes beyond state agencies. It's this overwhelming conversation with funders and things like that, just to make sure they understand the need to have that focus while there's additional dollars flowing down on that particular issue for the next 5 to 6 years.
All right, thank you. So I've made a note of the 2 that your group was surprised were ranked lower. We'll come back to those and start with those as discussion points after group 1 provides their feedback. So group 1.
All right, I think Matt hit a lot of the same things we were talking about. I think we talked a lot about in our group about Lifeline and kind of trying to find ways to encourage more adoption and use of Lifeline, and kind of not as a replacement for ACP, but at least it is some level of support that can be provided. I think another thing we talked a lot about with kind of the differences in eligibility of those 2 programs, and just making sure that we're reflecting that when we're doing that outreach, we're not overemphasizing or over advertising in the wrong spaces. Spend a lot of time talking about kind of adoption and kind of those types of practices. I think one thing that we really emphasized in our group, Rachel emphasized nicely, was, you know, there's a lot of good work being done out there and we don't need to rethink the wheel. You know, we can just share and disseminate best practices and things that are already happening, kind of endorse good practices, good curriculum for kind of digital navigators and things like that. And that's maybe a simpler way to speed things up and get more actual work done. Kind of emphasizing trusted organizations and kind of the sustainability of a lot of that digital equity work is important too. I think the last thing we talked a lot about was 2 more things maybe. Again, on affordability, I think making sure the math makes sense so that ISPs can actually offer service and offer an affordable option, and just making sure that that's taken into account when coming up with that affordability analysis and price point. And then lastly, I think we spent some time talking more about locates and permitting and just kind of the communication and coordination problems of how do you make sure that locates can happen timely, either sharing information, you know, GIS data with locators as they're doing their work, or, you know, understanding and sharing more information about permitting jurisdictions and things like that. So I think those are the add-ons we would have from our group. Did I miss anything grouped one?
All
Good.
right. Looks like you might have gotten them. Well, then let's circle back and unpack number 17 a little bit. Research, publish, and pilot digital navigator and digital literacy support best practices, including curricula for use by practitioners, pursue partnerships with public libraries, school districts, and nonprofits to develop training programs and toolkits to disseminate to the digital navigator and literacy best practices. What else do we want to add for that? So the comment was made that this was ranked a little bit lower than might be expected, and the spread was from 1 all the way from 1 to 10. Do people have comments or insights on that, or things that they might like to share?
I brought this up mostly because we have been talking about navigators and the need for the public to, and even those, to be informed and understand from both sides, how to apply for grants, but on the other hand, how for those who want to apply for grants, but also for the community to understand what broadband is, what are the needs, what can they afford, how to apply for, funding, all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, I see somebody put a 1 on that one, and the average was like 7.5. I mean, that was very surprising to me, considering. Now, I think Brittany mentioned that perhaps, I think it was Brittany, that perhaps it has to do with we have been so focused on actually, building, the infrastructure, that this kind of is an afterthought a little bit. Until we actually get to the point where we have the infrastructure, then we can start talking about navigators, even though at this point, for all those points in the middle, we do need navigators. So that's just my comment about how surprised I was to be so lowly ranked.
Thank you, Sal. Do we have other comments related to that?
I wondered if perhaps people thought this was covered in the digital equity plan, and the digital equity plan worked and therefore ranked it lower in the broadband planning. Not because it wasn't valued, but because they thought it was covered elsewhere. And perhaps it's about finding ways to tailor and take those ideas and reinforce them.
Other comments? Thank you very much, Rachel. Wondering if one of the things might be that folks that are reading the plan this year, depending on what your role is, who you're advocating on behalf of a community, an ISP, just an organization of some sort, that perhaps we might need some information in recommendations or that lead up to recommendations like this that contextualize the importance, so that they might not, they might have ranked it low because it's not necessarily relevant to the work that they do, but understanding the other work that others are doing might help place that in context. That might just be an idea. I don't know if it's a good one or not, but that context might have changed. Item number 15, I believe was that also one that you flagged group 2? I have it down, but I'm not sure if I wrote it accurately. And that was develop and implement grant administration and compliance processes that ensure efficient, transparent, and accountable use of public funding. And this also had a spread of 2 to 10 on this one. And I'm not sure if I wrote that down correctly, so it's the other one that was commented on.
I think we have more discussed the one above that, number 14, with sorry about that, Chris.
That's all right. No, that's my fault for just transcribing it wrong. So increase permitting coordination by acting as a liaison and advocate between internet service providers and the federal government, and advocating for and supporting efficient permitting compliance processes. And this also got a 7.88. So we had 3 that were kind of in the mid-7s with this broad spread. That indicates that there's perhaps just a different viewpoint. So would you like to comment on that one, or does anybody have any insight into that one?
Sure. I just, my comments and Matt had given some of them earlier, was just that we have very few problems at the state, county, local level as far as permitting goes. Most of our issues do relate to the federal government. either the National Forest Service, national parks, railroads. Those are the ones that are typically very, very long in lead times, greater than 12 months, sometimes exceeding 24 months. So it would be helpful for the installation of broadband to have some assistance with that.
Chad, can I put you on the spot and just ask, thanks for the compliment to state government permitting, but I think one thing broadband office is trying to do is find ways to maybe knock on the federal government's door more often, or help support you in that federal permitting. Is there anything in your mind that you would recommend at the state level we can do more of to ease that pain, other than just calling them often and early?
Yeah, I think well, that's a really good question. We've had some recent issues with the National Forest Service, and I think a lot of the problems that we have stem from they just have a lack of personnel with the number of permits that they're getting, and quite honestly, in the past they've done a number of the requirements for NEPA review, archaeological review, all the necessary elements that you need in order to do those projects through National Forest. And they've typically done those. Right now, for the one that we're trying to get through, we're going to have to bear the cost of that. And in this one example, it's worth about $100,000 that we're going to have to spend. And I just said that's a lot of money that we could be putting towards putting fiber in the ground versus paying for permitting studies. And so I think at the federal level, it would be good. I'm not sure how this would go for the state, but try to get a handle on what their lead times are for permitting. And so that if there can be an assessment there as to whether or not they have adequate staff to provide permits in a timely fashion. And I mean, at this point, I would say 6 months is timely. so I think, if we could reduce where they're at today to that would be an improvement even. So.
Thanks, that's helpful. I will say, in my limited knowledge that's growing every day, NTIA is the lead federal permitting entity on these BEAD grants. So Forest Service would be involved, but I think wouldn't have the lead responsibility, which maybe would ease some of that pain, but I think we're gonna have to wait and see how that plays out.
This is excellent context for these recommendations. Do other people have comments to make? Does anyone else have a comment to make on these two or other items that are on here that you read and you saw and you reacted to and thought, yeah, that's maybe something we could add to increase our understanding of the recommendation or the background for the recommendation? I'm not seeing any hands go up right now. At any point in time, you can add a comment in about that. But is there anything in these recommendations that are particularly resonant to you as you were reading through it? Is there anything that as you were reading through this, you thought it might have a high rating, but if we could have given it something above a 10, I would have given it something above a 10, or something that's particularly at this moment in time, do you think useful for us to highlight or focus on? Not seeing any hands for that. That's good. I think that maybe that means we're being thorough. So anything forgotten, is there anything that we left off the list that you would like to have included, or is there something that you would like to see elevated a little higher? Ratings are great, but sometimes when we look at the sum total of all of our recommendations, something sticks out that doesn't individually come across. So is there anything you'd like rated higher? All right. I'm not seeing any hands go up for that. Any other comments that you would like to make, or anything you would like to add in for context?
I guess just one thing on that side, just when you guys start to look at these in aggregate, one lens I would apply to them, just because BEAD is such a big thing, is, anything that would make BEAD go smoother may make sense to push to the top in that situation, because ultimately, if this recommendation gets heard 2 or 3 years down the road, it's not going to have the impact it does if it gets heard, as we go into BEAD in that situation. And so, I mean, the great thing about BEAD though is it will get that deployment done, which will then allow us to, prioritize, some of the additional factors of getting that, exposure to broadband and getting the equity, inclusion, and, affordability portions handled. But I guess I just feel like this is a different report in the sense that it's going to be the most funding that's ever existed in the history of broadband deployment. If the recommendations that could make that go smoother get a nod, as an ISP, I guess I think that makes sense, just because they have a better chance of helping us get to those second and third and fourth level situations, because without the deployment, those just don't end up being able to be as important. But
is that perhaps a recommendation in and of itself? Prioritize activities that would help make BEAD go smoothly. That's pretty broad. I'll say that. Or is that a philosophy that we should have as an approach? I'm improvising here, so I'm making eye contact through Zoom with Rory and Alyssa and Mark for.
Well, even if you were to bifurcate the recommendations to, these are the items that could, truly impact the rollout of BEAD dollars and create efficiencies if we can accomplish them early in that BEAD cycle, maybe there's just a separate group of recommendations, because they're just need to be dealt with more timely. And again, it's not that they're necessarily more important if we go out 10 years, but they're more important in the sense that they could have a much greater impact in the next, 2 to 3 years than some of the ones that are dependent on deployment. And if you don't get your BEAD deployment until 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, just by nature, it's not that they're less important, they're just less timely, but.
I think that's helpful, Justin. I think when we're working on the report and recommendations, maybe there's a separate call out of these recommendations are from the task force directly related to implementing BEAD and are potentially more urgent and require a more medium term action to be effective, right? Is that kind of what we're saying? I think that's a helpful framing for us.
These are great comments. Go ahead, Bob. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Kristen. I don't mean to be flip, but I wonder if one way to say this is faster scoring with more resources aimed at that. So that there's less uncertainty in how the money's being spent, and there can be more in provider planning, as well as more in understanding what consumers want because of meetings already in place by government and local business leaders.
I'll just take one example, so, ultimately locates.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't fit locates, it will break during BEAD. Like that, I would say that statement publicly. And so we could fix it after the fact when you're granting extensions for, build outs, but I would love to give you whatever we can give you for social capital to make some attempt to front end that instead of back end it, but.
So emphasize some of those things, emphasize locates or recommendations around locates. And Justin, could you repeat that phrase that you'll say publicly again? I'm going to write it down. So that's a good phrase.
No, I mean, it just, when you put the volume that we're going to have, it's a once in a lifetime funding mechanism. If the system is barely, moving along right now, it's going to break at some point, and you're going to have people that need to alter their timelines for their build outs because of situations related to permitting or locates in that situation. And so I guess just trying to give one example Where if we do that on the front end, we'll look super smart. If we have to deal with that 3 years from now when the whole system, grinds to a halt, it'll be a lot harder to deal with. But
thank you. That's great context. Alyssa.
Thanks for calling me. I might encourage task force members, or maybe this is staff with an ISP work group, but to create some even more specificity around this idea of fixed locates. And I know people had some discussion today, but I do think, there's some different, right? There's carrots and sticks, and there's money, and there's some different tools in the sort of policy and legislative toolkit. And I think it might behoove the task force to be a little more specific. And this is because I think there's quite a bit of interest in helping with this. And so I just wanted to say, if we could get any more specific, I think it would be really valuable.
That sounds like a great idea. Do we want to collect names of people who might be willing to work on refining those recommendations to make them more specific? Would this be a good time to do that? Or should we send out an email and see who would be interested?
Can do it over email, or we have
good.
some other industry groups we might tap to provide some expertise.
I think that's a great idea when you think about how much time we've spent talking about locates over the course of this year, and what a critical important part of getting things moving and keeping things running smoothly that is. This is a great idea. Other comments or questions or feedback or context? All right, then looking at the last recommendations, so 18 through 25, we only had one group that was able to complete those in the time frame. Is there anything that anyone would like to add on those specific recommendations? And you can always email comments to after the fact if you are driving home tonight and thinking of something that you wish you would have spoke up today about.
Kristen, I would like to just share the perspective that the digital navigator, digital literacy support, digital skills, funding for digital skills, teaching digital skills, and the support for everybody is part of sustainability. And we don't want to wait until the broadband's in the ground to start addressing those priorities. And so I just wanted to lend that voice.
I appreciate that a great deal. One of the things that feels different about this year's report and previous year's report is that there's a lot more activity going on, of course, in part because of the funding and the federal support for broadband. But also when you're looking across the state, we have communities that are at various stages of development. And so whereas one community might be at that very beginning stage of getting broadband, others are quite advanced. And so we've got a lot of kind of happily have a lot of moving parts. And so that context does become really important for this particular report. Other comments or questions? The things people would like to add? Seeing none, I think we might be done with our discussion for today. And if you do have things you would like to add, please do send an email. And Rory, I saw you unmute for a second, so I think you might have something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, thanks for the conversation today. It's really helpful for us to hear that flavor and hear your thoughts and kind of emphasize and rejigger things as we go through the recommendations. I think from a timeline perspective, for me and Mark working really hard on this report, and Josie and Matt and other members of our team, in May, we're planning to come back to you all with kind of the final recommendations, and then hopefully get some nice big thumbs up, and then that'll roll into the report that we'll finalize in May into June. So, there's still some time here. If you have other thoughts, you want to email us, drop us a note, please feel free. It's really helpful along the way.
All right, with that, I think we're back to you, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristen. So next on our agenda, we just have a few last items before we hopefully wrap up a few minutes early for you today, and that's next steps. And a reminder of the meeting next month on the 15th at 1 p.m. Rory, Mark, any following last steps or next steps rather that you want to discuss?
Nope, just be on the lookout for those refinements of those recommendations. Especially be looking out for those ones on the locates. So I'm looking forward to that one. So thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. All right, as a reminder, as I said before, the 15th is our next meeting. We look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you for your participation today. This was more cognitive meeting, and rather than sitting back and listening, we got to talk. So thank you for your discussions and have a good rest of your month.
Yeah.
Thanks all.